ombudsman because one of our political parties took the matter to the ombudsman for him to investigate the matter.
Right now, the Centre for Development and Enterprise says the country cannot afford a basic income grant. The CDE has released a new report which estimates that over 60% of South Africans live below the poverty line. For more on this, we are joined by the Centre's Bernstein to just give us more details. Why does the CDE feel that we're not ready for a basic income grant?
Well, it's not that we're not ready. The issue is, yes, we have terrible poverty and terrible unemployment, which is a key cause of our poverty, but we can't afford a basic income grant. Now, there are different proposals on the table, and they range from about 200 to 300 billion rand every single year to pay for a grant. And South Africa's spending is already unaffordable. We have rising debt, and it's just inconceivable where we would find the money for this. If you raise taxes for it, this will have an impact on economic growth and also job creation. So we're in a bind. South Africa's in a terrible situation. Appalling policy choices over the last decade have led to this really disastrous situation when so many South Africans are in terrible straits. But to think that a basic income grant to millions and millions of people is going to help is the wrong approach. And in fact, we think South Africa will be worse off if we do this. We'll have higher debt, more inflation, and a sort of economic shock throughout the system, which will lead to less growth and less employment.
So then in terms of your findings about people, 60% of South Africans living under the poverty line, I'm not sure if you agree that we at least need a basic income grant, or maybe if you have other solutions in terms of how that 60% of our population can be assisted.
Well, we think it's important not to think about magical thinking to solve poverty. We are in a terrible situation. I think in many respects it's a national emergency, a crisis on almost every front. But there are things we can do about poverty that will not make the situation worse. We have to make the hard choices for much faster economic growth. We have to make sure that that faster growth is much more labor intensive so that more and more people can get into the workforce. And then we already spend a lot of money on redistribution in South Africa. Cash transfers, which are almost 3 times more than almost any other developing country. Those are well targeted. It's our other redistributive spending where we spend a lot of money, but we don't get value for money. I'm thinking of basic education, of healthcare, of all sorts of areas of state expenditure where we are not getting results anywhere near the amount of money we spend. We need to reform that and get much more effective at that. It's criminal, really, that South Africa's results from our schools mean that we are at the bottom of every single international table. We wallow at the bottom 3, 4, sometimes even the worst of this, and yet we spend more than the national average, more than the international average proportionately of our budget. So we've got to fix our redistributive spending, and we also need a much greater sense of urgency in the country. People are suffering. The country's in deep trouble, and yet we don't seem to get urgency from government. And then lastly, we need a different approach to governance. It's long past time that we dealt with the corruption in our state at every level. And we need to look at whether we have the right people in the cabinet and at the top levels of our civil service, because we're certainly not getting the results that South Africa needs.
All right, so I've got a twofold question for you. Firstly, it's that, when it comes to the state being corrupt, yes, a lot of South Africans would agree, but of course there is the private sector which enables the state to become corrupt. So it's a vicious cycle, and it's not necessarily just one party that's doing this. It's quite a lot of people who are, for lack of a better term, messing us up. And also, in terms of the other solutions that you talk about, isn't tax, the most transparent form of, assisting the poor?
Well, let me deal with the last one first. South Africans are already quite heavily taxed. We have a small tax base when it comes to company and personal tax. We obviously have VAT as well, which affects almost everybody. You can raise VAT, but that would be a big shock to the system. You can raise private taxes, but the Davis Committee in 2015 said that a tax raise will not result in economic growth. So actions have consequences. You raise taxes and you will have enormous consequences on our economy. So that's the point we're making, that it's not just let's have a basic income grant. The key question is, how can we afford it? Of course, it would be nice to give everybody who's struggling some money. But even if you take into account the spending of that money, if people got a bigger grant, it wouldn't help with economic growth, because you're reducing our prospects for growth through raising taxes or any other method that we'll use to pay for that. So there are no free lunches here, and we're saying this is the wrong approach for South Africa. We will more than likely be worse off if we do that. We've got to go for growth, and we've got to make the hard choices for growth and much more labor-intensive growth.
All right.
Sorry, what was your first question?
Well, I think over there you'd agree with me that there's the private sector that enables.
Right. Absolutely. So we have created a vicious circle of corruption in South Africa, where the state is captured and is corrupt, and there are private sector actors, from the Guptas to many others, who are also corrupt, and they participate in this. And we certainly fund the ANC historically and probably today through corrupt activities in many respects. Now, because of state capture, state weakness, and a whole lot of other things, we're not very good at putting the corrupt people on charge and in jail and prosecuting them. I am in favor of prosecuting private sector crooks as much as public sector crooks, and the sooner the better. But we're not able to do that. But we should deal with both, public and private. Anyone who disobeys the law, contravenes the law, steals public money, doesn't conform with all our laws and regulations, the significant ones, should go to jail.
Well, thank you so much for speaking to me today. It was quite nice speaking to you. That was Anne Bernstein from the CDE. Let's take you to a short break now. Still